This video is going to be a quick introduction to some of the built-in data types in Python. And by built-in data types, what I mean is these aren't being defined in some external library like pandas or NumPy. They're just built into base level Python. So for example, let's define a variable myList to be some list. I'll call it 314159. And so the way that Python knows that this is supposed to be a list is because I have square brackets on the outside, and then I separate the elements in the list with commas. And then to check that this really is a list, I can use this type function. And there it tells me it really is a list. So similarly for a tuple, I could do my tuple equals, and if I want to make it in the analogous way to how I made this list, what I should do is exact same, but with round parentheses on the outside. So 314159. Okay, and then if I check what's the type of my tuple, okay, I get that it's a tuple. Another way we could make this same thing, let's call it, how about tup2. And I try in general to be careful not to overwrite anything that's already defined in Python. So for example, calling this tuple would be bad. And Deep Note's telling me that would be bad because by writing it in blue. So I usually try to choose a somewhat random looking name. So for example, this tup would be okay, or tup2. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert my list into a tuple. And the way I do that is by wrapping it in tuple. And so what this is saying is take my list and try to convert it to a tuple. Okay, and if I look at tup2, should be the exact same as my tuple. Okay, I could check that. My tuple equals equals. Okay, this is like true or false. Are they equal? Tup2. Okay, and this gives me true. If we were in MATLAB or something, then it would probably give me a length 6 vector or whatever of trues, like true, true, true. But here in Python, when I check are two tuples equal, it just says true if they're equal in all positions and false otherwise if they differ in any position. Okay, so those seem very similar. For example, you can get what is the second element in my list using this square bracket indexing. And remember that indexing in Python starts at 0. So this is the 0th element, this is the first element, this is the second element, this 4. Okay, and the exact same for tuple. Okay, I can use this square bracket indexing notation. One difference is if I do my list and then I say dot append about 20.4, and then I check my list, you can see that this float number 20.4 got added to the end. If I try to do my tuple dot append 20.4, okay, I get this attribute error, and it says tuple has no attribute append. Okay, I think of this more as a method than an attribute, but methods are a type of attribute. And so it's saying there's no way to append something. Okay, it's not important that it's a float. If I tried my tuple.append 3, you get the exact same error. And the background for that is that lists are allowed to be changed. They're what is called mutable. Okay, mutable, it like comes from the same base as mutate, whereas tuples are not. They're what's called immutable. So let's go on to set. And so I could say my set equals 314159. And so it's similar to my list and my tuple, but I use curly brackets on the outside. But things are a little different. So if I check my set square brackets 2, it says you can't use this kind of indexing or what it's calling subscripting here. So you can't get the second element out of my set. And if you look at my set, it looks like it's been sorted but that's not how you should think about it. Instead, you should just think it does not have a notion of order, just like sets in Math 13, for example, do not, or in any math, do not have a notion of order. And so that's the reason we're not allowed to get the element in position 2, because there is no such thing as position 2 in a set, either in mathematics or in Python. Another interesting thing about sets, so notice I made it using this curly bracket on the outside, is I can say, how about my set 2 equals 3, 1, and then 2, 1, 5. Okay, so I'm trying to make this set with 3 elements in it, and one of those elements is a list. And I get an error because lists are not allowed to go into a set. Okay, but if I try this exact same thing with a tuple instead of a list, okay, then it works fine. And if I look at my set 2, change the order, but you can see this is some length 3 set. Okay, so if I check what's the length of it, I get that it's length 3. And yeah, so tuples are allowed to go in a set, whereas lists are not allowed to go in a set. And it's related to this exact same thing where lists are allowed to change after you create one, whereas tuples are not. Okay, dictionaries look a little different, but they're at least defined very similarly to how sets are defined if you want to define them by hand. So let's call it, how about D for dictionary? And I'll just say 3 colon 0, 1 colon 5, 4 colon 10, 1 colon 2. Okay, that seemed to work. If I look at this dictionary, you can see that I had the thing that comes before the colon is what's called a key. The thing that comes after the colon is what's called a value. And you're only allowed to have a key occur once in a dictionary. So because I was trying to give it this key of 1 twice, only the last one that I tried to insert actually gets inserted. So that is one thing to notice about a dictionary. The scripting works a little differently. So if I do D square brackets 2, okay, it says key error 2, and that's because the keys are not related to the position. So this should have been position 2, but instead the keys are just whatever comes before the colon. So if I do D square brackets 4, then that works, and it gets me the value associated to 4. And one reason I wanted to do dictionaries in the same video as sets and tuples and lists, even though they look a little more complicated, is they have the exact same restriction as set does in terms of what can be used for a key. So for example, if I say, let's add a new key to this, and let's call it, how about 210, and I'll say this equals Chris. Okay, and then if I check D, you can see that there's this new key that's this little length 2 tuple, and it has this corresponding value of Chris. Okay, whereas if I try to do D square brackets and then a list, how about 110 equals Davis? Okay, I get that exact same error we saw before, unhashable type list. So you're not allowed to use a list as a key in a dictionary. You are allowed to use a list or anything you want as a value in a dictionary. So I could say D, how about, notice that this is the string 4 rather than the integer 4. And then I can say this, I want to be the list 110. Okay, now if I look at dictionary, I see that there's both this integer 4 key, there's this string 4 key, and yes, I was allowed to put a list as a value. I just wasn't allowed to put a list as a key. So let's see, have I missed anything other than range? No, so only thing that's left is range. And range, what we're mostly going to use it for is with for loops. But let me just show you. So the basic way to make a range is something like like this. Let's call it, how about, R for range. Okay, and then if I look at R, it's not very helpful, but if I convert it to a list, for example, then you'll see that this gives me the numbers from 0 up to, but not including 10, going up by 1. Okay, and you can make slightly more complicated ranges, but not too much. For example, you could say, start at 3, go up to 20, go up by 5. Okay, let's call this, how about Y? And then let's try to convert this to a tuple. Okay, and so this starts at 3, goes up by 5s, and it's never going to equal what I put here. So if I put, for example, 23, so what I was trying to say was it's never going to equal this upper bound. So even though 23 is equal to 18 plus 5, that doesn't get included in this range object. And so ranges are much more rigid than any of these other things we've talked about. For example, if you try to do range, start at 0, go up to 10, go up by 0.1. Okay, I get an error because only integers are allowed to go as arguments to this range constructor. You're not allowed to use floating point numbers. So this is a lot of different material. I think the most important thing I want you to get is that there's this subtle difference between lists and tuples. And one way to think about it is that lists are allowed to be changed after you create them, and tuples are not. And another way to think about it is that tuples are allowed to go into sets. Tuples are allowed to be used as keys in a dictionary, whereas lists are not. Okay, I'll stop the video here. Thank you for watching.